Welcome to Trial Lawyer Prep. What if you could hang out with trial lawyers and jury consultants? Ask them about connecting with clients and juries more effectively. Then take strategies, tactics, and insights to increase your success. Each week, Elizabeth Larrick takes an in-depth look at how to regain touch with the everyday world, understand the emotional burden of your clients and juries, and use focus groups in this process. Elizabeth is an experienced trial lawyer, consultant, and founder of Larrick Law Firm in Austin, Texas. Her goal is to help you connect with juries and clients in order to improve your abilities in the courtroom. Now, here's Elizabeth.
Hi there. Another quick introduction for our guest, Matt Murphy, who is joining our podcast. Matt Murphy is a lawyer in Great Falls, Montana. He practices with his dad and his brother, and has basically grew up helping in the law firm in some capacity since he was 12 years old. He has a passion for workers' comp, and he is currently a co-chair of the workers' compensation section for the Montana Trial Lawyers Association. If you have questions about Montana or workers' comp law, please reach out to Matt. His contact will be in the show notes. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast, Trial Lawyer Prep. I'm your host, Elizabeth Larrick, and we have a shiny new episode today with a wonderful guest from a state that I have a very special place in my heart for, Montana. Matt is joining us. We heard a little bit about his bio in the mini intro, but I wanted Matt to come join us because I met him multiple times at NTLA, Montana Trial Lawyers Association seminar. And he has this great, bubbly personality. I know that he loves what he does, and he has a true heart for helping workers and does workers' comp, which I know a lot of folks that are listening, even my Texas folks, are thinking, well, I don't do workers' comp. And that's okay, because what we're going to talk about today is client management, and more specifically, more about client expectations. And this came up for me here recently where I was assisting and helping with a trial, and there was some definite expectations that had been missed. And so the client had quite a huge expectation for this trial and their time on the stand, which was very different from reality. So we had to work with that. And so that kind of spun itself into an episode. And I thought, gosh, Matt would be great for this because I know he loves his clients. He's also a pretty good straight shooter. So I thought, let me get Matt in here to help us. So Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. That's very flattering. And I can't really imagine a better compliment for an attorney than it being obvious to other people that they love their clients, because we do. And I'd say that because I speak for all of Murphy Law Firm. And I'd also like to return that. Thank you for all that you do. We've really learned a lot by listening to your podcast and attending your speeches at the Montana Trial Lawyers Association. So thanks for everything that you do as well.
Well, pile it on, Matt. I'll take it. I love this stuff. That's why it's part of the podcast, and why this podcast is really made for people who are working with clients, personal injury clients, workers' comp, employment law, a little bit of business litigation stuff, because managing client expectations is really across the board. But where it pops up so often for people like us and like you is when we're having our clients that are going to testify, or they're coming to a hearing, or they're going to mediation, and understanding really what we need to be doing so that we kind of avoid some of these places where we need a lot of trust from our clients when it comes to handling a case and making decisions for that case. And when it's their turn to come in and do testimony or be at a mediation, answer questions, right? We want to make sure that they're going to trust our guidance and coming to trial as well. So just from a standpoint of like, why is this even an issue for us as lawyers? And my perspective is we go through law school. We're super trained to think intellectually and be super logical about stuff. And sometimes managing expectations feels like stickier and a little bit more emotional when it's straightforward for us. So I know it's hard to have the conversation with people. And has that, for you, Matt, like practicing, has that been kind of a hard conversation or a little bit uncomfortable to help manage people's expectations?
Absolutely. And it's kind of shameful to say, but in Montana, work comp, that arena, you have a lot of that, because the benefits that an individual is going to get in a work comp claim, that pretty much day one anymore, I will have the conversation that says, you're not going to be in love with the result. No matter what I do, no matter what anybody does, the law just affords the remedies that it affords. It's a insurance policy written by the Montana legislature. That's the Work Comp Act. And it just keeps getting whittled away. It's been on this downward trajectory for well over 50 years here in Montana. I know that's not just true in Montana. I'm familiar with other state schemes. And so you're not going to be able to tell a work comp client, we are going to have our day in court talking to the jury about the human damages. There's no pain and suffering. There's no loss of consortium. There's no established course of life. So you're limited to medical statutory wage loss benefits. Those are capped in all sorts of crazy ways. I could go on for days about it. We've challenged the constitutionality of those statutes. We've had a case in every decade for over 3 decades, at least one, but those are hard. They take forever. You got about a 4% chance of winning right out of the gate. So anyway, you are, in most of the clients that I represent, having a conversation day one about the fact that the benefits that are available to them are going to be less than what they're hoping for, certainly less than what they've lost. I mean, we are not getting made whole in a work comp claim. And I've realized that you kind of got to start on that foot. Because if you just talk them into how well you're going to do and how big of a delivery you're going to have day one, and then a month later or 3 months later or a week before trial, which would be terrible, now you're bringing this to their attention, you've already lost it. So they don't want to hear it, but they can tell you're being honest, and they can tell you know what you're talking about and that you've had that conversation before. So yeah, back to your question. Yes, we have that conversation. Unfortunately, it's a little bit easier in the work comp context because you can almost have this common enemy, the Montana legislature, and here's this book and I'll show you the exact verbiage, which is a little bit different than all the complexities of trying to explain why, when you go before the jury, things might be a little bit different than what they hope. But that only gets you so far. It's still going to be on you to be honest and candid and establish that rapport with your client.
Yeah. And I think you kind of nailed it. It's really about the timing of the conversation and how you're presenting it, because that's a total intellectual, like, oh, you think this is what you deserve, or this is literally what it says in black and white. And you can go talk to 6 other people. They're going to tell you the same things. But a lot of times, and I'm sure you've had this in practice where you have somebody who comes to talk to you and they interview different lawyers and they say, well, the other lawyers didn't say that. But the other lawyer said this or that. And then it really kind of comes down to how do you express yourself in the most honest way possible. Like, I'm just here to help you. And here's truly what it says. I'm not making stuff. I'm not just trying to get you to sign on. And I do think it's really kind of one of those things where it's just a hard conversation sometimes to have. And it's hard to break people's expectations and to know you're not going to be made whole. I mean, that's a great example. Like, there's this whole loss here of like, here's where you need and here's what the law provides. And I think even that happens a lot of times in car wreck cases as well, where it's just like, well, $5,000 is all they're offering. And it's like, that's true. There's not really a guideline for this, but that's why we go to trial and why we go to litigation and all these other things. That's kind of where you have to constantly be talking about managing these expectations. You said, hey, you guys do it right on the front end. Like, are you doing it along the way as the case goes along? Or, when you guys are coming up to that making decision point, how else do you work in managing those expectations?
So with comp, that's easy for me to answer because I do it right off the bat, but it's for specific reasons. That is, the statutes that prescribed benefits are just, I don't like them. And I can say that, and I can say how we lobby, and I can tell them all the stuff we do behind the scenes that aren't in their case to try to change that. Some of it works, all of it helps, most of it doesn't do a whole lot, right? But that's an easy one for, like, say, a car wreck case or really any personal injury claim where it's not so black and white. You don't really have that common enemy, the statutes that limit benefits. Instead, as we all know, oftentimes the enemy is some aspect of your client's case, or in other words, some aspect of them. And I don't think you're going to be able to understand it well enough to really get into it day one. But what you can do, and what I certainly do, is day one. I mean, I do this before I hire them. In fact, if I'm thinking, we usually probably do this twice before we sign them up. Just ask them, what are your expectations? I find that most people and by most is probably a vast majority, are reasonable with their expectations. I want to get my car fixed because I'm missing work right now and this rental isn't working out. My neck hurts. I want to get my medical bills covered. I've had to miss a month of work and I got a mortgage. I mean, that's all totally reasonable stuff. And so pretty clearly right out of the gate, you're going to realize this individual has reasonable expectations that I should be able to meet if I'm doing my job. And I hope I am. So you're going to have that conversation in the intake, and then you're going to have that conversation when you meet with them in person, because part and parcel to all this is during your representation of clients in whatever realm, you got to be meeting with them in person and you got to be talking with them. And you should be asking them, what are your expectations now as the case progresses? And you've had a number of conversations with them where you've covered this item in this conversation, a development, now it's depot prep. So, as the case grows and your relationship with that client should be growing, if you're calling your client for the first time the week before a deposition, I don't know how you tell them anything. How can they trust you? How could you trust them? As it goes, I think most of the time you'll find their expectations shift a little bit and kind of track what it should based on what you've been telling them, based on what you know about the case that you've been communicating to them, based on the rapport that you've established by having really good communication and always shooting them straight. And you kind of mentioned clients that come in that have consulted with other law firms, they're almost like testing you. I find that the easiest and the only really solution to that, but certainly the easiest, is just shoot them straight in plain English and let them know. And if they don't like it, you're doing yourself a favor, but they're probably going to like it because you might be the first person that's actually, shot them straight. And whether they have a law degree or not, people like juries can detect the truth and the credibility. They got, like Jerry Spence says, those psychic tentacles, and they have that in your office. They're looking at you. You know that they know when you're exaggerating even just a little bit versus when you're shooting them right down the middle. And that's how you got to approach that, I think.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And I think that's kind of part of some place where we don't sometimes as lawyers stop and ask that big open-ended question. What are your expectations now? How do you think things are going right now? We're really just stopping and listening and asking that open-ended question, because most of the time when we are calling and having conversations, it's us telling them, here's what's happening. Here's what the next step is. Here's these instructions. Here's this, right? And so that stopping and listening along the way, like you said, really helps to build that trust. And also, I think it's really important for us to also express what we expect as well. And that way you're building that relationship together where it's a tit for tat. Like you tell me, I'll tell you, right? So we're constantly on the same page, because what can happen if we don't have those conversations early and often is, I've seen people get fired. I've seen people get sued. I've seen, honestly, like a client basically loses interest, and it's just like, they're like, whatever, I don't want to do this anymore. Let's finish this out. And then honestly, you never get a referral or a good review from that person when it was probably just a matter of having these conversations. And nobody wants that to happen. But what I saw happen in that case was basically what started as probably a small seed that grew into this giant tree of anger. And it was just like, how do we now manage this? Because now we have a whole different set. We're not changing it. That is set. And we've got to now somehow work and manage around this, when we probably could have done that a long time ago and not have this giant ball of anger that we're dealing with. So let me toss it back to you, Matt. What are some other things that you've seen happen when we don't manage clients' expectations?
That's a really good analogy, because if you represent people long enough over in complicated areas of their life, because a personal injury lawsuit, as much as we try to limit the inquiry and as much as we try to keep as much of our clients' privacy to themselves as possible, their whole lives get opened up, whether they like it or not, regardless of what we do. It just happens. So you're involved in all areas of their life. And when it's that broad for that long, you're going to have, we're people, they're people. You're going to have some issues that start as seeds. And I really do feel like you can, at that phase, intervene, salvage the relationship. By doing so, it's just like having your first fight with your significant other. You become stronger in your relationship with that person. And hopefully you don't have to have too many fights, but we've had plenty of clients that are extremely difficult that nobody else could help. And we have some excellent firms, and we've had clients had to move on as well. Sometimes that is what is necessary, but we kind of pride ourselves in being able to take a problematic client, if you want to call them that, or someone who's really difficult to work with and get through it by being honest, by counseling them, So yeah, you got to keep asking the question, what are your expectations? But you also got to keep asking, how you feel? How's it going? What do you think? Could we be doing anything differently? The only reason you wouldn't ask certain questions like that, I think, as a lawyer, is because you're kind of insecure about what the client might say. And there's no reason for you to be like that. You know the law better than them. You know the process better than them. You should not worry about what they're going to say, because whatever it is, it's going to lead to the root that you need to address to get back on that same page with them. And you can't forget your obligation to be a counselor of law. You're their advocate. You're steering them through the legal process. But part of that, and as we all know, the part that pays massive dividends by the time you're actually getting to trial or getting them through a deposition, if it doesn't go to trial, is the rapport and the trust that you've established with them. So I think your question, I went off on a tangent there, was what have we seen? What are some examples of breakdowns or bad, say, developments that have to be communicated that lead to a disgruntled client, essentially, right? And one that actually just happened to me last week was in Montana. We've had a work comp judge for well over a decade who I wouldn't say trusts more than a new judge by any means. It's just I know this old judge that I've been trying cases in front of and had conversations with, listened to him speak. So I'm really comfortable predicting how I think he'll approach certain issues. Now we have a new judge. In the appointing process, there's partisanship to a degree. Not that I believe this new judge has that problem, but is an unknown. And so it has to change the advice that I'm giving to my clients. And it sounds like I'm saying something different than I said 6 months ago, because we're still in the litigation process, pretty far from trial. That's not what's happened. It's just a new judge got appointed. So things did change. And this isn't a great example because this client wasn't disgruntled, but the reason was they weren't happy. They didn't like what I was telling them. But I've had enough communications with this person. I've put the time in, had enough interpersonal reactions, and been able to actually bring them into my office face to face enough. And they know me now. They know my paralegal very well. They know our secretary, they trust us. So I was able to explain to them, show them. And now we ultimately resolved that case for less than I probably would have advised under the old judge. But with the unknown and some new issues, I do believe it was the right decision. So, that's one example. And then I can think of many more where due to a new fact or say a legal ruling, you've kind of had a lot of your eggs in a basket. You get a bad ruling. Now you're telling this client, well, it's not going to be anywhere near where we were hoping to get. But if you set that up right by explaining that at the outset, it shouldn't be that difficult to say, see, remember when we talked about this before and now it happened. So now we're kind of in this camp A as opposed to camp B where we were hoping to end up.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly because rulings change cases. We don't have any control over that. We can try and predict things. You may take a deposition and all of a sudden you learn one of the claims that you thought was maybe pretty valuable is now dead, right? Dead in the water. You got facts that basically kind of obliterated, not obliterate, basically take away your factual basis for the claim. And that's sometimes where, like you said, it goes back to when you're making a motion or you're taking depositions, I think sometimes we forget we need to check back in and say, hey, let's just do a check-in. And we took these depositions. Here are the facts that we found out. This is how it impacts what we're doing. It's going to change things this way or that way. We can predict as best as we can, but I think that's part of going back in and keeping that education going and keeping that conversation open, because I think I see that happen quite a bit, like where it's like you take that position, you find out something new that's detrimental, and it's like, oh, I don't want to make that call, or I have that difficult client who I know is going to be really and I think you made a very good point of getting that person in person. And I think even just getting somebody in Zoom, because that way they're able to see your face and see how you're expressing yourself and making yourself available. And it's not that you're saying, oh, I'm sorry we failed, because we can't control what happens in depositions, the facts come out, or how a judge rules. And I certainly have had a situation where I had to call a client and just say, yeah, listen, this happened and it was a mistake, and here's what I can do to make up for it. And here's how it's going to impact things. And anytime I have totally come to the carpet and just said, hey, this is what happened, everybody's generally like, okay, we get into problem solving mode instead of fixating the problem. And that's generally what I try to say is listen, this is where we are now. Here's how I'm going to help. Here's how we're going to make up for it. But because at the same time, I think, like you said, you've done a good job of bringing people along in the relationship. And in that case, they're going to have enough trust and background to know, okay, this is what Elizabeth said at the outset. This is what Matt said at the outset. But here's where we are. And it's okay to remind people of the battles that you've been through to get to this place. Litigation is not easy for you or for them. And I think sometimes they forget about it's a battlefield the whole way through. So keeping that education open as well, I think this is a huge factor in keeping people, because I think that surprise factor is the worst thing. That's what I find is the worst thing.
Yeah, surprise coming after a massive gap in communication and they haven't heard from you, and then all of a sudden you just call them with bad news. You can't expect anybody to be okay with it in any type of profession, right? You go get blood exams from your doctor and 6 months later they call you and say, well, yeah, you know what? You got a month to live. You'd be like, I kind of expected a call earlier. Or you bring your car into the mechanic and then they send you off on your way. And then 6 months later, the car breaks down and they're like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, your engine was bad. I mean, that would be unacceptable in any realm. It's not acceptable here either in ours. And ours is very complicated and very interpersonal. So I think there's even a heightened duty on us to meet those client standards of trust and communication and relationship building. And you kind of mentioned, you often mention in the multitude of episodes that you have addressing depot prep specifically, but also trial prep. One really good way to kind of keep your client in the loop that doesn't necessarily require that you set up an in-office meeting is to just send them these developments in the case as you go. And it's almost like giving them homework, but it's also keeping them in the loop. It's also keeping them invested. So I will send them every deposition transcript, unless I can think of some examples that I wouldn't, but any fact witness, their doctor, I will just send them and say, hey, if there's an obviously big bombshell fact, I'll point that out and call them in and whatever. But if it's just pretty run of the mill, tracks with more or less, but obviously every deposition has some new information, maybe good, maybe bad, whatever it might be, send it to them. Hey, give this a read and tell me what you think. Just a quick little cover letter. Sometimes they won't call you. Maybe sometimes they don't read it. I'll call them out later if they don't. Hey, what'd you think of that deposition? Did you see that part where Dr. So-and-so said that? And it's like, hey man, I send you stuff to read. I expect you to read it just like I'm reading it and I'm there. And if you send me an email, I read every word. You can check them there, but it keeps them coming along. It keeps them apprised of the developments. Oftentimes they'll call you. Sometimes they'll give you really good stuff. They'll say, hey, that's not right. And here's somebody that I know that can refute that, or here's why I know that's not correct. A lot of times they'll just say, man, Dr. Miller really kind of bailed on us there. He told me in the appointment that he was 100% sure this was causally related. And now he's saying that he doesn't really know. And you're like, right. And that's his testimony. And that's going to affect the value. And that's going to be what the jury hears. And so now you have that conversation, and it doesn't have to happen in the mediation, or they don't read it in the motion in limine or whatever it might be. So you can keep your clients involved with a simple letter and a transcript, an email, and they'll get it. I mean, they'll understand most of the stuff. And when they don't understand, guess what? It's a good time to have a conversation and get them on the same page.
Yeah, and sending people transcripts is pretty intense, Matt. I'm not gonna lie. But
Maybe it is.
Yeah, I don't know. That's when it's in your example was for their doctor. You go take their doctor. Here's what your doctor said. Then reading for rep stuff maybe a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, I feel like some people get super lost and they're going to give up. But I like it. Even just giving a quick recap email, or I love using, because people love videos. I love using Loom. It's free and you can make a 5-minute video for free. And they literally just watch, because again, you talking, we're easy. Talking to us is like easy. So you can talk that out without having to write it. Because if you're like me, like when I write a client email or a lawyer email, like I write it and I leave it and I come back and I read it again. Because I just want to make sure, like, how can I be clear? How can I leave no ambiguity here? Like, am I covering everything? Versus like, I think when you say it, it's 5 minutes. You can watch it again and speed it up. And so can they. And Loom will even do a transcript as well, so they can kind of watch it. But keeping up with people that way, in a way they're going to read it and pay attention. And of course, I always ask clients, like, what's the easiest way for us to communicate? Like, and I know you're going to, like, some people love email. Of course, I love email. We live and breathe email, but some people don't. Like, well, can you just text me? I'm like, sure. And you can do the same thing on your phone. Like, just text talk or do that little audio file. It's really quickly just to let them know. And like you said, it's like, do you want more? Let's get a call. Like, or are you good? You know, like just making sure if there is anything else. But I love that because those little changes from that deposition, that's where you're going to get a mediation. And that's where the defense is going to throw it at. You're like, well, that's not what they said in that appointment, right? And then it's like, okay, now we're going to be in a huge deadlock because your client thinks it's one way, but in reality, like that's just not how it came out in the depo. So that's a good, solid example. And why I really like taking the client depo a little bit later is, again, so you have that ammo, like you know what's in there, so you know where that client has to fill in those gaps. Then that significantly helps. And so they don't have to get down the weeds. But okay, here's where that gap is, and here's where the client can help or be prepared and understand. And then I think, like you said, the more we can kind of get them invested in what their role is, the better they are at meeting our expectations and for themselves and helping them kind of get through the emotional, psychological burden of being in this situation, being permanently injured at times, or there's always going to be some kind of major impact to people's lives when they're injured. Like that is such a huge component of giving them a role and the ability to do their best at it.
Precisely. And everything we've been talking about so far is super important in establishing the trust and the ability to have those conversations with your client, for better or for worse, the ability for them to be coachable, because as you're talking with them more and more, and as you're keeping them invested and involved in the case, they are becoming more and more coachable. I have not had an example yet where a client just can't help but eventually perceive, okay, this is a complicated situation that I'm not familiar with, that I need help with, or at least I would benefit from help. But what it also does is it enables you to do your job. I mean, it serves so many different benefits, but if you really want to be able to present the best version of your client's case to the judge or the jury, especially the jury, you got to understand them. You got to know them. That's going to take time. And so you're checking off all these important boxes when you're doing these trust and relationship building activities, like going to their house. I mean, you want to get on somebody's level. And I think that, obviously this isn't my idea, but I read this in the first Jerry Spence book I ever read. I mean, you go have a meal with your client in their house. I mean, so that they're going to trust you. They're going to like you, and they should. I mean, it's a special thing to be able to do that and for people to invite you in, but it'll build that trust. It'll allow you to have honest communications with them. It'll give you access to the inner circle in their mind and in their heart, but it'll also give you the tools that you're going to need to present their case. So you don't have to think of it like you're only doing this so that someday, if you need to give them bad news, you'll be able to do that. It will help with that, but it's kind of necessary to enable you to do the job if you end up in trial and everything in between, even writing the settlement brochure or the mediation brochure. I mean, you will do a much better job having an intimate understanding and relationship with your client versus not really having had much communication with them up to that point. And jurors can tell. So can attorneys. So can mediators. They know.
Oh, absolutely. I always tell people if they're going to go to trial, do you like your client? Because who cares what the jury thinks? Because they're going to know right off the bat you don't like them. But I think there's also this occasionally when I'm talking with lawyers about preparing and bonding, and people would say, my personality is just not necessarily very warm to that bonding perspective. And that's where, like, I feel like just having open conversations. asking them about their expectations and constantly talking with them and listening to them is still, oh my gosh, goes leaps and bounds to that bonding and that trust relationship. Even though it feels like you're still very much sticking to like an intellectual place, like checking in and keeping those lines of communication open, that's half the battle, because bad facts can happen anytime. They can be at the beginning, they can be in the middle. Like depositions can change things, and like avoiding conversations that are difficult because you're busy or you're just going to let your paralegal take care of it. Like all those things just totally lead to trouble because it just kind of falls up. And then, like I said, it can just lead to maybe having to take an avenue your client really isn't happy with. Or sometimes what I found is even if you do everything right, like you're going to learn a lot about your client who will never have their expectations met. But you know that front end and you know how to manage it. Like, okay, like you said, difficult clients, we're all going to have them. But as long as you're doing your half of load on like what expectations are and educating and like doing all that, then you can at least tell them like, hey, listen, we're talking about this. I'm not hiding anything. You're being upfront with how you feel, and I'm being upfront with what the facts are. So we can work through this together, or if you think somebody else do better. Because again, like you said, there are some people that you just might not jive with.
Yeah, absolutely. And the obligation is not become their best friend. In fact, I mean, that happens. I mean, I've become friends with my clients, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but that can be a problem. And that's not, again, that's not the job description or requirement. This doesn't have to be a relationship where you're going to be best buddies with this person. But if you're considerate, and I say considerate because, I mean, you don't just get to be so busy that you're blowing off their feelings or you're not taking the extra steps to make them feel good. I mean, you need to polish and do that. And then just being honest, you're going to develop mutual respect. That's what's important. That's what the jury needs to see. And they will. We talked about how, well, the insurer and the defense attorney will know. The jury will definitely know whether you like your client and what your client thinks of you relatively quickly. And that's critical. I mean, if your client doesn't trust you, how is the jury going to trust you, right? And that's if you get to trial. If you don't get to trial, there's definitely a reality where you could end up in the same spot result-wise, but depending on the route you took to get there, one being that you had a good relationship with your client the whole way, their expectations are met, they're satisfied, they're a happy customer, they give you good reviews. Nothing gets you off on a better foot than when your client comes to you because their best friend or their brother or someone that they really trust is the one that sent them to you. So just having good referral sources by maintaining that standard is probably the best thing you can do for yourself. But you can get to the same result that way, or you can go the way where, you know, you still get them the money or whatever it is, but you didn't have a good relationship during that period of time. They're not happy. And I definitely have seen that. Every client's different. But in my experience, it's more often than not how they feel about you and how they feel like you've been doing their case, et cetera, then the ultimate result that's going to factor into how happy they are with you. And again, I mean, with work comp, I'm already in my mind going, wow, there's all these examples where no matter what, they're not going to be happy necessarily with the result. But knowing that at the outset, okay, and then taking them through and showing them and being really communicative throughout, seeing this is what I was talking about. This is what we talked about on day one. And then after this, whatever it is, and going forward, and this is that law I told you about. Now this is what we're saying to the judge. They will be a lot happier. And ultimately, they'll know you did your best. They'll know you knew what you were doing and that you did a good job. And they will put the blame where it's supposed to be, which is on the law, on the legislature, not on you. You can have a very happy client after the fact, even if they can't get full justice like you're not getting in a work comp claim.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you're saying is absolutely true for car cases and for, I mean, I definitely can think of many examples of personal injury cases where, yeah, especially in med mal, like,
yeah,
anywhere you practice med mal is going to be like, there's just not going to be generally just not going to be enough quote unquote justice to go around because it's just, that's the way the law's written. And I think you're right. You can take two paths. You can take the path where, yeah, you're going to have to spend some time on that relationship and expectation. And that means you and your office, like you said, like it's always a team effort and always have everybody communicating, or you can make it difficult and have it less communication. Yes, you're getting the job done. Yes, you're going to get to that finish line, but at the end of the day, like, where's the client going to end up? And I think what people understand is people, and they may not ever understand why a law is written the way that it is. Like, they may never understand people at that capital are making decisions that really truly impact them. They may not ever get that, but they will totally get how you treat them. And how you treat them as a lawyer is how they will believe any lawyer will treat them. And we sometimes are the only lawyers they have contact with. And I always try to keep that in mind, because when I was growing up and along the way, there were lawyers, and to me, they just had all this power over my life and other people's lives. And it was just like, wow, what an impact they're making. And I know other people feel that way. They have that same expectation of like, what you do for them will totally impact their lives. And it's true. Even if you get them the best result, which is still not the greatest, like, you're still making an impact in their life. And I think we always should be keeping that in mind of like, okay, I know what I do as a lawyer is pretty normal to me because I do it every day. But to those people, like, it makes a huge difference. And how I act really is how they're going to perceive all lawyers. And I want that to be a good thing.
Absolutely. I mean, how many of us have had examples where clients are going, I just don't trust that doctor and I don't want to treat with them anymore. And you're going, ooh, that's a really good surgeon for sure. It's just the bedside manner. And so that doctor with the little charm school, I mean, they're the best doctor in the Northwest, but it is a necessary part of the job. And more so, I think, with us than, the surgeon who can show up and do a good surgery, but it contributes greatly to your client satisfaction, their impression of attorneys. We kind of talked about at the outset, I mean, when the client comes through the door, they have expectations for their situation, their injury, their claim, but they also kind of have a preconceived notion of you. And unfortunately, a massive, and even clients who walk through our doors, a massive portion of that is tort reform and just shyster lawyers and whatever you want to call us. I mean, they all have that. And my brother is a general contractor, and he's always got about 6 to 8 blue collar construction workers with him, whether it's in his living room, whether they're out getting a bite to eat, whatever it is. That's my focus group. That's my down and dirty focus group. Because that speaks for Great Falls, Montana, especially. I'll just float the ideas by them in all regards, and they'll just almost dial it in 5 minutes what I'll spend thousands of dollars and hours doing with a formal focus group. But one of the things we will periodically discuss is lawyers in general. And those are the guys that I represent, guys and gals. I mean, they get hurt in that construction trade. Those are the people we represent, and they're going to have that initial impression. They're walking in, and their whole lives, maybe they've been kind of degrading us and just cheerful conversation, all those lawyers. And you're starting on that foot. And what will immediately kind of immunize that problem is honesty. It's that simple. You just shoot them straight and simple, and they'll pick up on it. They know how to read it.
Yeah. And I think translating that over to, it's the billboards, right? It's the billboards with the millions and millions. It's the commercials with the millions and the millions. And most of the time, there's not clients that I would deal with, because I'm like, well, okay. I always ask people, like, what do you think happened to that person that they had to get millions and millions and millions? Like, right. And that's kind of perspective, not necessarily expectations, but let's keep ourselves in a perspective where we kind of got to do that, and helping with some comparisons. But yeah, I mean, it can be super frustrating because people do come in with that, and doing it day in and day out. Like, you eat what you kill. Like, we got to keep that wheel going. We got to keep people coming in. And I think sometimes we forget to like stop. Hey, what's your experience? Hey, what do you expect of me? And just to make sure that we're checking in and doing that in the correct way. And because you never know, and something could totally creep up, and you just like, you don't know until it's too late. And all of a sudden they're fuming. You're like, what is it that they're upset about? Like, and you just don't know. And that's kind of what getting that whole hidden surprise thing comes in. We're just like, oh, or you get really upset about something that they're doing. And it's like, okay, if these things are happening, like, just stop, have a conversation. Like,
bring them in, get them in. The minute it bubbles over, get them in. Just stop, call. We're setting up an in-office appointment. That's it. Come on in. I mean, I found that to be one of the most effective tools in the toolbox. Just immediately, once it's officially past the boiling point, just, okay, we're going to postpone this and we're going to talk again when you come to my office, or I'll come to you, whatever. But we're going to meet in person. I mean, that cures the majority of those issues in my experience.
I agree. And I think people want your attention, and then it's bad attention. And then it's really difficult to stay really upset when someone's sitting across from you, like literally just listening. It's like,
Yep.
I can't really be like upset with you while you're just sitting there listening to me. And then we're problem solving. And it's not like everybody has to say, oh, of course, well, I'm sorry. And like, that's not what we're talking about. Because sometimes it's just the job. Like, we can't be sorry about a judge's ruling. You can be disappointed in it. Like, that's for sure. Like, I'm disappointed, you're disappointed. Here's how we pick up the pieces. And I think sometimes that's where, like, we think, oh, well, somebody has to apologize. It's like, no, sometimes we just have to get together, talk about whatever it is that's upsetting, figure out if it's really something we can control, and then let it go or work with it.
Yeah, that's what they want. They want a problem solver. They're coming to you to fix this problem, to make this situation work for them. I mean, so you're right, but you can't, like you said, you can't just jump there. You got to start with just the same stuff you'd start with anybody, any human, about when they're going through a tough time or a difficult situation. The same exact rules apply. And it's easy to put on the professional face and just not want to go there and not talk about emotions and not talk about disappointment, for fear that you might be admitting that you're the one that disappointed them, or for fear that they might blame you. Don't be afraid of that. I mean, talk about it and allow them to talk about it and express themselves. They'll feel better. They just having them re-explain the story in their own words will dispel some of that trauma, if you want to call it that. It's the psychological facts. And then you can get to the problem solving, which is, of course, where we want to go right away. And in that realm, have options and obviously have a plan. Know your stuff. I mean, you generally will, and certainly probably more so than them by leaps and bounds, but still don't wing that part. When you're delivering bad news with a follow-up of, now what should we do? Don't wing it. Have a good plan. Have thought it out yourself. And I find that giving them options. I mean, as much as you might say, look, man, you really ought to do option A, but still, if that's the only option you present, it's a little bit suspicious. I would be suspicious of that if someone was saying, this is all you can do. You only have one option. No, that's never true. I literally can't think of a circumstance in life where that is true. I mean, and so right away, you've activated the part of their brain that's going, I might want to get a second opinion here. So give them some options. Here's some different choices. I mean, my recommendation is they're going to probably go with your recommendation. Obviously, you're the professional. That's why they hired you. But they like choices. I like choices. Everybody likes choices. These are the potential consequences. Shoot them straight on that. Because if there is an obvious option, the potential consequences are going to make that obvious to them too. So, I mean, there's definitely a way that you can structure that conversation without them blaming you, maintaining trust, in fact, strengthening it, dispelling some of that trauma for them, and then getting on the same page and making it their choice to be going down the road that we're now going down together.
Perfect advice. Absolutely. Because anytime you try to just tell someone what to do, this is the only option. Like, I'm telling you what to do. Like, the inner 2-year-old and it pops up, like, you're not going to tell me what to do. Like you said, there are always options. So it's like, okay, this is why, like, anytime you like try to just give someone a list of instructions, like, people are always going to be like, well, I'm going to do it with mine. Because again, our inner 2-year-old. So I think that's super advice, which is prepare yourself in that conversation, have options, know what those consequences are, each option. And then also, I think going in, knowing you're going to first listen, let them vent, let them tell what's upset with them in their own words. And so trying to go in and recap and say, okay, so I know that you're mad. And so let's just like, here are the options. Nope, you got to take that first step and listen to them, let them get it out, and then move through, like, kind of with that, moving into that problem solving area and having those things ready and set and go for you, and have thought it through, even just 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's not going to take you that long, depending on if the legal issue is really complicated. You probably already briefed it, and that's why you're having this conversation. So, I mean, that it's not like that takes a massive time commitment, but you should be polished in part of the presentation because that is what you're bringing to the table.
Absolutely. And I think most of the time when we have options, a lot of them lead back to leaning more on the client to get something for us. Like, okay, this is what the doctor said. So that means we need more before and after witnesses now. So I'm going to lean on you now. That means we're going to do this instead. Or we heard this, like, okay, that probably is going to close our claim. But I'm going to go talk to one other person. I'm going to talk to our expert, right? This person who could actually, the judge may listen to and get their feedback on it. And then I'll get back to you, right? So there should always be some kind of plan of action and always a follow-up. Here are the options. You don't have to decide today. I want you to think about this. And then we'll come back and revisit.
Oh, yeah. Great. I mean, I make them sleep on it. I say that, right? Like, just like you don't go to a car dealership and walk away with a car. You go home and go to sleep. You wake up in the morning and then you decide. You don't buy a house the same day you walk through one. You shouldn't come into the lawyer's office and have the lawyer say, okay, but you got to make your decision. No, that's everybody resists that type of pressure as they should. So, right, you let them sleep on it. You say, hey, if your wife or husband has any questions for me, let's have another conversation between the three of us, or they can call me directly. If we need to have a couple more conversations before you make a decision, that's fine. This isn't like we got to have this answer in by Friday at 5. And if it is, then you better be on Monday.
Yeah. And I would say, because we definitely, and what you and I are talking about is when we have bad facts or we got to come in and manage expectations. But if we're thinking about time conversations, like if you're managing expectations and keeping communication lines open, when you do have that time off, when you do have that, this is our deadline of deciding to go to trial or take that settlement, like they know you're going to get it in space and time and options to think about it. And they're going to be able to make that decision much quicker than somebody else who hasn't had as many conversations with you and discussions and knows as much is going on in the case.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And kind of the typical example is mediation. I mean, they got to make a decision, which really we all know is you can ask for an extension, and you should. If you have an indecisive client, that's kind of what you should do for their sake. But I don't really have that issue, and I don't often, because I think you're starting that conversation weeks before the mediation, or at least a week before the mediation, by copying them with the settlement brochure. Obviously, you call them to go through it before you sent it, talking to them again a couple days before, the morning of. So that's how you're approaching virtually everything. Deposition prep, the direct examination at trial. And in doing so, you're never actually putting them in that pressure cooker where they have a time limit. And I mean, I know I won't accept that, and clients they'll jump off the cliff before they'll climb down if they feel like it's their only choice and you're not giving them any other options, So to their own detriment. I mean, I just have a client right now who she's got a chronic illness and there is a treatment for it. It's terminal, but she's holistic and she doesn't feel comfortable with modern American medicine. And for however you feel about that is irrelevant. This is a human. It was a life that's worth saving. And the doctor's saying, this is your only choice. And if you don't do this, I swear to God, I'm going to get rid of you and you'll never get treated. I'll tell every other doctor not. I mean, he's going crazy. But what he's really doing is saying, this is your only choice. And that's that. And so she's exploring all this other stuff. It's not working. And I'm sure her doctor's unsurprised by that. But what she's not doing is engaging in life-saving treatment. And I think a huge part of the reason is because she was given one choice and an immediate, you better get on it right now. And it's like, that's a mistake. That's a professional mistake. You might be able to save that person with a different approach. And all it is your words and your attitude. Why would you not adjust? Mm-hmm. So I'm obviously pissed at the doctor, but I'm also on his team. I mean, I agree with him. It's just the way that he's delivering it.
Yeah. And I think, that's half the battle is delivery for sure. And I think, I mean, human psychology is you can't tell me what to do with one option.
Yeah. Right.
That goes for anything. If you call my CPA, they tell me nope, you got one option and you got to pay all. It's like, my doctor tells me there's one option. Like, well, I'm pretty sure that you have more than one way to solve problems. Mm-hmm. So, Matt, you have been so awesome. Let me just make sure there's not any other tips or tricks or things that you can think of that would help those as far as when we think about like, okay, practical advice for managing clients' expectations before it gets too late?
I mean, we hit the majority of the stuff that I wanted to get out, but I really feel like I ought to just bounce that question right back to you, because I've gotten more from you on client preparation than anybody I can think of. So I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this stuff with you, though, and learn from you, and hope it has some valuable information for your listeners who are, I know there's a lot of them, and they're all excellent trial attorneys. So thank you very much.
Of course. Yeah. And I think we definitely nailed it. And I think sometimes it's just, we all need a little refresher, right? So maybe this episode is just a refresher for everybody who's listening. I'm like, oh yeah, like I do need to make sure and like check in with people, and that's all it's about. And for me, thinking about managing expectations, doing it at major decision points, at filing litigation, a deposition point, making sure we're communicating those things, because those are pivotal points, checking in. And that's really all you got to do. And when you get the bad news, just pull the Band-Aid off. The festering is like the worst, because sometimes you just can't. Then you really have to manage a whole different problem, and then like literally crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. And that's never what you want to do with a case or a client. So
I couldn't agree more. And everybody knows that. The only reason you don't do that is because you're trying to avoid it, because you don't want to have that conversation, or you're worried, or you're insecure. But it's the same rule that applies to any relationship you have in life. You got to address those issues before they turn sour and the virus spreads.
It is absolutely true, because most people, they've already made a commitment to you. They've signed the paper, they're with you. But it's still a relationship we both have to do work in. It's not a one-way street, no matter what relationship it is. And so, yeah, you need to have expectations. They need to know what they are. They have expectations, and you need to find out what they are. Because that communication line is sometimes half a battle with folks. And then the only thing I would add is, like, I know most people have some kind of case management situation that helps them document all our case notes and call notes. I used to just literally use a Word document that had like date and action conversation. So I always had everything in one place. That was super simplistic take on it. I'm sure there's lots of fancy case management software out there, but having that documentation, having those emails was always really helpful too, just to make sure sometimes you got to have that timeline to remind people, like, we covered this in the beginning. Here, I'm going to remind you one more time. And here we are. And we're now having this impact on you. Hard to see that impact a year ago, but here it was along the way. So just another little fine-tuned point. But Matt, again, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. Hey, folks, if you want to learn more about Matt, or you want to get in touch with him, or you want to go to an into the line of it, or I will tell you, like, if you want to pick his brain about workers' comp and what the lobbying efforts and what they're doing there, like, this is your guy. Like, he literally is the point guy. So please reach out to him. He is a wealth of knowledge on that stuff. All of his contact information will be in the show notes. So if you want to contact him, actually, Matt, let me ask you, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you, or if they want to just learn more about it, what's the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody can shoot me an email at matt@murphylawoffice.net. So MURPHYLAWOFFICE.net, or call my office at 406-452-2345. Like you said, I'd be happy to talk with anybody regarding anything, especially Montana work comp or any other state's work comp. I love to collaborate on those issues and find it to be very valuable. So thank you again, Elizabeth.
Awesome. All right. Like that, we'll get all those contact in the show notes. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please rate and review it on your favorite podcast platform. If you'd like to connect with me, go to LinkedIn. I'm trying to get more folks to connect with me on LinkedIn. And so that's what I would ask for you today. And otherwise, thank you so much for listening.